All right, this video is called Signal Phrases, Setting Up Your Reader to Understand Your Evidence. So let's recall the goals of an argumentative paragraph. Make a claim that clearly, adequately, and concisely answers the whole prompt. Show that the claim is true. So the function of signal phrases in this process. So signal phrases prepare your reader to understand your evidence by providing appropriate context. So they're the phrases, they can actually be clauses as well. We're just going to call them phrases. They're the words that come before your evidence, and you frame the evidence for the reader by various techniques, and you want to provide the background context so that the reader can understand your evidence and it doesn't just come out of nowhere. If the evidence is a quotation, you need to say who the speaker of the quotation is and to whom and why. So you're trying to give the details of the background of the quotation so that when the reader reads the quotation makes sense because the reader has context. Or whatever the evidence is. Whatever the evidence is, the signal phrase is providing context. So here are some examples of signal phrases. The first two are for quotations, and the other one is just for a personal anecdote. So, when being punished with the task of whitewashing the fence, Tom lies to his friends in order to trick them into doing his work, saying to them, so it gives speaker, Tom Sawyer, audience of the quotation, his friends, and the background. And then you can understand the quotation. If you just put that quotation in there and you hadn't immediately just read that passage in the book, you probably wouldn't know where it was from. So that signal phrase helps the reader understand the context of the quotation so they can understand the evidence and start thinking about it themselves. So the next one, same thing. As the narrator tells us, not only does Tom swindle his friends out of their Saturday plans, he also cheats them out of their belongings. And that one takes a colon, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So again, who's the speaker? The narrator. Who's the audience? His friends. What's the context? He's swindling them. So the final one is just a signal phrase, not for a quotation, but just for a personal anecdote. When I was 8 years old, I swindled my sister in a way similar to Tom Sawyer, blah, blah, blah. And so there's just some examples of what signal phrases actually look like. So punctuation of signal phrases, especially on quotations, here's how to do it. You punctuate a signal phrase with a comma when the phrase is dependent, when it's just a phrase or it's a dependent clause. So when being punished with the task of whitewashing the fence, Tom lies to his friends in order to trick them into doing his work, saying to them that you can't put a period after them. It's not a complete thought. So that takes a comma because it's a dependent clause. And that's why it takes a comma. Moving on to the next one, punctuate a signal phrase with a colon when it is an independent clause. So as the narrator tells us, not only does Tom swindle his friends out of their Saturday plans, he also cheats them out of their belongings. You could put a period at the end of that sentence. So that's an independent clause, and it takes a colon. So often boys forget and they try to split the difference and they put a semicolon. A semicolon is never really the appropriate punctuation for a signal phrase before a quotation. So it's either a comma if the signal phrase is a dependent clause or a phrase, and it's a colon if it's an independent clause. Okay? So takeaways. Recall what the goals of an argumentative paragraph are. Recall what the function of a signal phrase is. Recall how to punctuate signal phrases.